Your film is now ready to be shown.
Genetic control, 20% probability. 0, 1, yes, here's the unlikely event that became true, and I just go on through the others the same way.
This is not a crap game. It's a serious game at the University of Pittsburgh about the year 2001. Rolling the dice is Dr. Olaf Helmer of the RAND Corporation. With Theodore Gordon, he is conducting a simulation exercise. A panel of experts has studied a list of possible 21st century developments, from personality-controlled drugs to household robots. They have estimated the numerical probability of each, from 0 to 100%. The 20-sided dice are then rolled to simulate these probabilities, a use of random numbers known as the Monte Carlo technique, and often used in think tank games. All of this is highly speculative, but the game serves a useful function. It encourages talented people to think about the future, the current fascination of a new intellectual breed, the Futurists.
So we wind up with a world which has the following features. We have fertility control, 100-year lifespan, controlled thermonuclear power, continued automation, genetic control, man-machine symbiosis, household robots, wideband communications, opinion control, and continued urbanization.
A 71-year-old futurist who has been called the citizen of the 21st century, architect-engineer R. Buckminster Fuller.
We ourselves consist physically of atoms, and we know that all the atoms have their frequencies. It is theoretically possible to pick up all of our frequencies and actually send us by radio.
You mean we'll be able to transmit ourselves somewhere else?
Yes.
To be reconstituted in some distant place?
Yeah.
Today, at our universities and research centers, in government and in business, the futurists are looking at the 21st century. They do not pretend to be prophets. They say the future cannot be predicted. It will be invented, and it is determinable. People can determine the future if they understand and then decide on the choices open to them. The most important choices are likely to be sociological, political, and economic, not technological. In this broadcast, we will look at the future with the futurists, with these men. Sir Peter Bryan Medawar is a Nobel Prize-winning zoologist. Dennis Gabor is a physicist at the Imperial College of Science and Technology, London, and author of Inventing the Future. Daniel Bell is chairman of the Sociology Department, Columbia University, and head of the Commission for the Year 2000. Walter Sullivan is science editor of the New York Times. Gerard Peel is editor and publisher of the magazine Scientific American. Lord Ritchie Calder is a science writer and professor of international relations, Edinburgh University. Herman Kahn is director of the Hudson Institute and author of On Thermonuclear War. Isaac Asimov is a science and science fiction writer and professor of biochemistry, Boston University. Harrison Brown is professor of geochemistry, California Institute of Technology, and author of The Challenge of Man's Future. Bertrand de Juvenal is a French economist and journalist and director of the future-oriented group, The Futurables.
If I were offered to spend a day in the year 2000 and see how things are then, I said see how things are to be, I would hate it. Because I don't want to know how things are to be. I want to exert action as long as I live so that the sort of things which should, in my opinion, be, have more chances of being. If they're all set, it doesn't interest me anymore to see the year 2000 than it interests me to see the year 1000. The merit of the future is that it is not set. The merit of the future is that it is the area in which we can exert our will exert our efforts, and try to validate our values. That is the merit of the future.
Some people talk about predicting the future as if the future was going to unfold itself independently of our own wishes and desires. Now, I think one can take it as one of the great lessons of modern science or modern technology, that anything that is in principle possible will be done if people want to do it enough. So when one asks what is going to happen in the 21st century, what one really wants to ask is, what do we want to happen in the 21st century?
I'm myself a physical inventor, a passionate inventor, and I'm very well aware that I'm one of the probably last generation of physical inventors. Of course, we still need inventions, but we don't need very much in terms of physics. Biological inventions we still need. Cancer is still something we must get rid of. But after that, what is important, the creative minority must put their mind on human happiness, on the study of psychology and of sociology. If it were up to me, I wouldn't let a single first-class talent go any more into physics or chemistry.
Where would you put them?
Into psychology.
If I can be perhaps overly large about it, I would say we're becoming an intellectual society. Not that everybody's going to be an intellectual. This is a business civilization today. Most people are not businessmen, but the basic values of the society have been in terms of business. The basic rewards go to business. And I think in the same way, the basic institutions of the new society would be intellectual institutions, in that the scientists, engineers, mathematicians, economists will be the new men of the society. And I think it's true for one very important reason. It's not that we have more knowledge, which we do. There's a change in the character of the knowledge. This, I think, is the most important thing. And it's a change in the character of the knowledge in this respect that, by and large, the most important knowledge today is theoretical knowledge. This is where it seems to me the intellectual institutions, and particularly the university, becomes important.
Mr. Bell, most of us are inclined to think pretty much in the 21st century in terms of the gadgets we're going to have, the push-button life we're going to lead. Is that the way we ought to be looking at the next century?
Well, it's a very entrancing way of doing it, surely. But I'm not sure it really helps very much. I think so much of the discussions I've read about the future get concentrated on the new kinds of things that men will be able to do. It sort of feeds the kind of Batman or Superman kind of instincts some of us have, you know, in terms of being omnipotent in this particular way. Now, 35 years ago, one of the things which entranced people completely was the idea of fractional horsepower. And if you read the technological journals, the idea was everybody's life is going to be transformed with fractional horsepower, small motors. Now, it's true to some extent they help, because with fractional horsepower, you begin to get electric carving knives, you begin to get electric toothbrushes, but I won't say that these have necessarily transformed our lives in a very meaningful way. So I'm not sure that gadgetry is the best way of looking at the future. I would say, perhaps this reflects my own bent as a sociologist, to try to look at structural changes in society, which is why I come back to things like changes in the pattern of occupation, changes in the sector distribution of an economy, changes in the character of knowledge, as overall determinative of the kinds of jobs and lives people will have.
What do you think will be the major scientific breakthroughs in the next 34 years before the turn of the century?
Well, of course, there may be some fundamental breakthroughs in knowledge. Knowledge of the nature of the universe, you know, resolving these problems as to the nature of the universe, whether it's an eternal, ever-expanding universe or an oscillating, expanding and contracting kind of a universe, things of tremendous philosophical interest, but perhaps of more remote practical importance. Another one of these would relate to the nature of matter. Here we've been groping towards an understanding of the nature of matter, and it looked very simple a generation ago. Now it's gotten terribly complicated with all of the many different little bits of matter that you can produce in an atom smasher. But obviously behind all of this there's some system, there's some pattern, and perhaps we'll get this. Again, the practical applications of this are hard to foresee. But there are also very practical things that I hope and think that we are going to do. We're going to make it practical to produce energy in a clean way and in great quantity, perhaps through harnessing the hydrogen bomb reaction, the fusion reaction. These recent developments in producing batteries and fuel cells that can be used to store and make use of energy conjures up such a wonderful world, you know, of no automobile exhaust, no stack gases, you know. This really could be a brave new world of clean cities and clean highways. And this, it seems to me, is within reach.
By far the most important task of modern medicine is to extend throughout the whole world the kind of medical advantages and privileges which are enjoyed today in the United States and in the advanced Western countries generally. And this will have to happen. This isn't merely a medical problem. This is a tremendous problem of administration, a problem of politics as well. And needless to say, it would be pointless to achieve it unless it were accompanied by a population policy. Because one of the consequences of these advances in medicine, indeed it's not it's already happening, is the threat, which is now a reality, of overpopulation.
I have a phrase which I use in my lectures to my students, which is, freedom begins with breakfast. And you can have all the freedom in the world, but if you're not fed and you're not taken care of, if society is not taking care of your needs, then you're not free. The liberated slave dies in the ditch, you know, of hunger. And therefore we've got to come to terms with what, in fact, are the basic requirements of this vast population we're going to have. And on that world scale of population, not just pockets of hunger, but really beginning to look at this problem as a potential catastrophe of mankind. The population explosion is just, to me, as serious as the atomic explosion.
The number one human problem, I would name, is the problem with which 2/3 of mankind goes to bed every night, and that's the problem, when do we eat? The feeding of mankind, the feeding of the poor, the clothing of them, the housing of them, means the industrial revolution of the underdeveloped countries of the world. So how is that revolution going to be managed humanely? The industrial revolutions that have occurred so far in history have been pretty cruel operations. We deplore the Russian story, we look with horror on the Chinese story, but we ought to examine our own histories and our own memories of what it took to conduct the American Industrial Revolution. The 35 million human beings that arrived in Steerage Passage and percolated through the slums of our cities. The Chinese that are buried under the ties of the railroads, as Archibald MacLeish has said. The reconstruction of the human cost of our industrial revolution would appall us if we did it honestly. The answer to this problem is economic aid, and economic aid highly informed by science and technology. The important thing here is information transfer. It's transfer of technology. Technology of the education of the cadres of engineers and scientists that are needed, and doctors and physicians and technicians of all kinds. The delivery of $1 worth of this aid stimulates the production of a total of at least $5 of local activity in economic development, potentially in Brazil or India, because the major input at the other end is labor and mineral or agricultural resources, which they have in abundance. And this is the best bet the American people could lay on the future with the enormous resources and capacity that the scientific industrial revolution has placed at the disposal of our democracy.
We keep on saying that the great conflict which is coming, I don't necessarily mean a war conflict, but the conflict of attitude, is no longer East-West, it's North-South. It is, in fact, the colored world against what I call North Temperate Zone man. It's a rather useful description, then, by the way. It includes the whole of North America, includes the whole of Europe, includes the whole of Russia and Japan. It's really the clash between the highly developed countries and the underdeveloped countries.
We talk about undeveloped countries and how people are going to get the most advanced technology. This is how it's going to happen. It's going to happen via the moon. For the first time in the history of man, they're sending man off into space to finally stay there on more than a sandwich and thermospatal basis, which it's been using so far. To really stay out on the moon for a year, space for a year, you're going to have to send with him everything that he's needed for his ecological regeneration. The air must be there, he has a process, and then he'll have to operate as a process. In doing so, we're going to then have to contract something like a mile diameter activity of the Earth down to a little black box weighing about 500 pounds, the most we can allow, which is going to take care of all his regeneration so that his liquids and everything become satisfactorily regenerative locally. You'll have to add a little to it every once in a while because entropy is at work and systems always really do run down. But he'll be able to operate for a long, long time. And the capsule that he's in will be the first scientific house in the history of man. So with 2 billion people looking at him all the time, the little black box operating there, everybody in the world is going to realize you could have one of those little black boxes. You don't need any sewer systems, and you don't need any water supplies. You don't need any separate generators in the city. This little black box will just keep you going.
We will continue with Buckminster Fuller on the 21st century in a moment.
Are we in the future likely to have a great increase in the scientific knowledge to a magnitude we can't even dream of today, thanks to him from brawn work to do simply brain work?
I see humans around the world having one very, very important function. You cannot have mass production unless you have mass consumption. The more consumers, the bigger your undertaking. As we really come to automation, which can really do the physical work, people don't have any significance whatsoever anymore as muscle or automatons, muscle machines. They have only significance as consumers. Whoever has the most customers is going to win in the great industrial battles. This is very important. China, we lost the enormous numbers of customers when we lost China's friend. Whoever's going to get India and Africa and South America to be the patrons of their industrialization needs them as consumers, not as producers. They don't have to pay for anything. They pay by just being there as regenerative consumers. Because now I'll have to talk about something which will be one of the very big new realizations by 2000 AD, which will be a realistic scientific accounting system of what is wealth. We now know that wealth isn't the goal that the old pirates used to have. Wealth is energy, and we have an Einsteinian world in which the scientists found that when energy left any local system, engine, it only did so by joining another system. It did not go out of the universe. But experiment after experiment, they found the energy never got lost. So they had to write an entirely new law of energy called the law of conservation of energy, which said energy can neither be created nor lost. So then suddenly we got a new clue to wealth. Wealth is not something that's going to deteriorate and get lost, which was a great way of thinking and all the economics. Next thing I discovered that wealth consists of something more than energy. It consists. So I found that now that every time we use it, we say, I make an experiment. Now, every time you make an experiment, you always learn more. You can't learn less. You may learn that what you thought was happening isn't happening. That saves you a lot of your time, because we want to then increase the effectiveness of our time. So I then say that the intellectual factor in wealth is one which every time we use it always improves. We always learn more. I've discovered that the energy part can't run down, and the intellectual factor, every time we use it, improves. Therefore, wealth, I discovered, is something that always increases. So that I would then point out to you that we are going to be able to afford to make everybody customers, and we're going to be able to afford then to bring in your Africa, and this is the answer to your question. We talk all world, going to have to make all of humanity successful or none.
What do you think the relative power will be between the present major contenders, China, Soviet Union, the United States, and some of the older powers, England, France?
Well, we would, if we had to guess a kind of a lineup, it'd be something like the following. 2 more or less superpowers, United States and Soviet Union, but nowhere near as super as they have been in the past by quite a bit. 5, say, large powers, led by Japan, which is the great undiscussed quantity in the world today. It's a fantastically vital, dynamic country. Probably followed by either West Germany or France, then in turn followed by China, and then there's the United Kingdom probably being up the rear. There would be 3 intermediate powers at least: Italy, India, Canada. These are all on the verge of becoming large powers, but not really. And then lots of other powers, of course.
You put Red China fairly far down that list.
Yes.
34 years won't have seen them rise to the Soviet-American rank.
Oh, almost without question not. On the record, China has been the greatest power in the world for about 3,000 years. Most Americans don't realize this, but during most of the last 3,000 years, Chinese were richer than the Europeans, per capita in total, more advanced, and so on. When China has been well governed, it's been centrally governed. You know, and they're used to these interregnums of 200-300 years, 100 years, and then a return to power. The problem they have is there's a country lying off their coast, Japan, which is even more impressive. If you took Japan away, I think China would end up as the third largest power. They're competing with Japan, and that, as we learned 20 years ago, is quite difficult. Japan is a country which is currently doubling its gross national product every 7 or 8 years. Nothing has grown that rapidly in the history of the world. Furthermore, if you study the Japanese national character, Japanese mores, Japanese government, Japanese technologies, Japanese decision-making, you more or less conclude there's a good chance this process will continue to the end of the century.
We are now in a world in which no place on Earth is more than a few hours from any other place, where no one on Earth really need be ignorant of what is happening anywhere else on Earth, so that we have the physical capacity to be a truly single world. What is needed now is what is needed now is getting rid of our habits of thought that date back to the time when every little valley on Earth was far removed from every neighboring valley, when every little city was a separate little world. And this is difficult to do. It may represent, in fact, the greatest problem facing humanity a century from now, when we have all the capacity to conduct our affairs as a reasonable unit. This is not to mean that we're all going to be the same, we're all going to conform. Nobody can have regional differences, not at all. We face a number of common dangers. We can defeat those dangers only by common action, and we must learn how to take that common action. We have the physical capacity to do so. We need the heart to do so. How one can tame the human heart is beyond me, except that I think that we have two alternatives. By a century from now, the human heart will be tamed to the extent of facing the problems of the world sufficiently together so as not to kick each other while doing so, or else we will have destroyed ourselves sufficiently so that this entire discussion here means nothing.
I am just as convinced as can be that man today has much more power than he realizes. I am convinced that man has it within his power today to create a world in which people the world over can lead free and abundant and even creative lives. And that starting now, applying the power we have is none too soon. We have already waited to the point where we are in very serious danger of painting ourselves into a corner. One of our problems is that we tend to live for today. We tend to say that, well, in one way or another, things will work themselves out. We can no longer afford to behave that way. We must take a long-range view of man and his problems, and we must attempt to the best of our ability to look into the future, to ask where we are heading, and if we don't like where we're heading, then to start now to do something about it. It's purely a question of putting that power to work, putting it to work energetically enough. And here is where my fears really lie. I fear that we won't recognize soon enough that we do have this power, and once recognizing it, that we will put it to work rapidly enough. But I am convinced that this can happen. I am convinced that we can create a world which will pale the golden age of Pericles into nothingness.
The 21st Century was filmed and edited under the supervision and control of CBS News.